Ukraine was weeks away from going broke. Not we need to tighten the budget broke. Not cut some programs broke. Weeks away from not being able to pay soldiers or keep the lights on broke. The IMF projected a funding gap of 130 billion euros for the next 2 years. Bloomberg reported that without outside money, Kyiv would run dry by summer. Salaries, pensions, ammunition, air defense missiles, all of it gone. And the one thing standing between Ukraine and financial collapse? A single man. In a single country with a single veto. Viktor Orban, Hungary, again. For 2 months, Orban blocked the European Union's 90 billion euro loan to Ukraine, the largest single financial lifeline the EU had ever assembled. He endorsed it in December, got his country an opt-out so Hungary wouldn't pay a cent, and then in February he vetoed it anyway. Why? Because Ukraine shut off an oil pipeline. That's it. That's the reason. An oil pipeline. While Ukrainian soldiers were dying on the front lines in Donetsk, while Russia was bombing civilian power stations, while the country's economy was bleeding out, one European leader held 90 billion euros hostage over cheap Russian crude oil. It's like watching someone refuse to call an ambulance because the ambulance might scratch their driveway. But today, April 23, 2026, the deadlock broke. The EU approved the full 90 billion euros. The 20th sanctions package against Russia went through, and Viktor Orban? He's leaving office in 2 weeks, replaced by a man who just told Vladimir Putin to end the war. This is the story of how Europe almost failed Ukraine, how a pipeline saved the day, and how one election in Budapest may have changed the trajectory of the entire war. Let's break down what this money actually means, because the number is so large it almost loses meaning. 90 billion euros. That's $106 billion at current exchange rates. It's more than the entire GDP of Luxembourg. It's more than the annual defense budgets of France and Germany combined. And it's all going to one country fighting one war. Here's how it breaks down. 60 billion euros is earmarked for military support, compensation to EU countries for weapons they've already shipped, plus new purchases of ammunition, air defense systems, and military equipment. The remaining 30 billion euros covers government spending, salaries for soldiers, teachers, and civil servants, social benefits, pensions, and critical infrastructure repair. The first 45 billion euros is scheduled to arrive by mid-2026. The second 45 billion euros is reserved for 2027. Payments are conditional on Ukraine continuing anti-corruption reforms. Any backsliding and the money gets paused. And here's the most interesting clause. Ukraine only has to repay the loan if Russia agrees to pay war reparations. Moscow has categorically ruled that out. So in practice, this is a loan that will probably never be repaid. It's the diplomatic equivalent of your friend lending you money and saying, "Pay me back whenever," while winking aggressively. But there's a catch that tells you a lot about where European politics are heading. The military portion of the loan includes Made in Europe provisions, requirements that as much of the defense spending as possible goes to European manufacturers rather than American ones. That's not just about supporting Ukraine, that's about building Europe's own defense industrial base. The EU is using Ukraine's war as the catalyst to rebuild military manufacturing capacity that's been neglected since the Cold War. Whether you think that's strategic genius or geopolitical opportunism depends on where you sit. The loan is financed through joint EU debt, meaning the European Union itself borrows the money on capital markets, backed by guarantees from 24 member states. Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic opted out of the financing scheme. The remaining countries will pay about 3 billion euros per year in interest. Germany's agreement to this is significant. Berlin has historically opposed common EU debt. This decision cracks that door wide open. To understand how we got here, you need to understand Viktor Orban, and I mean really understand him, because this man has been the single biggest obstacle to European unity on Ukraine for 4 straight years. Orban has been Prime Minister of Hungary since 2010, 16 years. During that time, he transformed Hungary from a promising post-communist democracy into what the European Parliament officially voted to call a country that is no longer a full democracy. He's been Vladimir Putin's closest ally inside the European Union. He visited Moscow, he shook Putin's hand, he called the invasion of Ukraine a conflict instead of a war, and he used Hungary's veto power inside the EU, where many decisions require unanimous consent, to block, delay, or water down virtually every major package of Ukraine's support. Here's the timeline of this specific disaster. In December 2025, EU leaders approved the €90 billion loan framework. Orbán agreed. He negotiated an opt-out for Hungary. His country wouldn't contribute a single euro. Deal done, everyone goes home for Christmas. Then in February 2026, Ukraine halted oil flows through the Druzhba pipeline, a Soviet-era network that carries Russian crude oil through Ukraine into Hungary and Slovakia. Ukraine's stated reason was that the pipeline had been damaged by Russian strikes. Orbán's response was immediate. He withdrew Hungary's support and vetoed the entire loan. "We're waiting for the oil," Orbán told reporters in March. "The rest is just fairy tales." Let that sink in. A NATO member state, a country that is supposed to be part of a collective security alliance defending European values, held up €90 billion in wartime aid to a country being invaded because it wanted its cheap Russian oil to keep flowing. Hungary gets most of its crude through Druzhba, and most of its natural gas from Gazprom contracts. Orbán wasn't just blocking aid. He was protecting his energy relationship with the country that's doing the invading. The frustration inside EU institutions was volcanic. One senior diplomat described the veto as a turning point in relations between Brussels and Budapest. Other member states explored legal workarounds, invoking obscure treaty clauses to bypass Hungary's veto, using enhanced cooperation mechanisms that allow willing countries to move forward without unanimous consent. The EU Commission had already used similar maneuvers to immobilize Russia's central bank assets despite Hungarian objections. But the loan itself needed a budget amendment, and budget amendments require unanimity. There was no workaround. Orbán had the EU by the throat. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister Taras Kachka called the package literally a matter of life and death. That wasn't hyperbole. Without this money, Ukraine couldn't pay its soldiers, couldn't buy ammunition, couldn't keep hospitals running, and couldn't rebuild the power grid that Russia had systematically destroyed over 2 winters of targeted strikes. 2 things broke the deadlock. One was a pipeline. The other was an election. On April 12, 2026, Hungary held parliamentary elections, and Viktor Orbán, the man who had ruled for 16 years, who had rewritten the constitution, who had packed the courts and captured the media, lost. And he didn't just lose, he got obliterated. Peter Magyar and his TISA party won 141 seats, a 2/3 supermajority. It was the largest mandate for a Hungarian party in a free election in the country's post-communist history. Turnout hit 79%, the highest since the fall of the Iron Curtain. Hungarians came out in numbers that suggested this wasn't just an election, it was an eviction. Magyar is a former Fidesz insider, a lawyer who spent years in Orbán's orbit before publicly breaking with the party in 2024 over a corruption scandal. He's described himself as a critical pro-European and a conservative liberal. On Ukraine, he has been deliberately measured. He told reporters that Ukraine is the victim in this war and has every right to protect its territorial integrity. When asked what he'd say if Putin called, Magyar replied, "I'd tell him to end the war. It would probably be a short phone conversation." Magyar has stated he will not block the EU loan. He will not block Ukraine's EU membership bid. He does not plan to send Hungarian money directly to Ukraine, but he won't hold 26 other countries hostage to prevent them from doing so. After 16 years of Orbán treating the EU veto like his personal toy, this shift is seismic. It's like your most annoying coworker who's been blocking every meeting agenda for a decade, finally getting transferred to a different department. The relief is physical. But Magyar doesn't take office until May 5th at the earliest. The loan couldn't wait that long. Ukraine was hemorrhaging money by the day, so the second factor came into play, the Druzhba pipeline. On April 21st, Ukrainian pipeline operator Ukretransnafta announced that the damaged section of Druzhba had been repaired, and Russian crude was flowing again toward Hungary and Slovakia. The EU had quietly asked Ukraine to fix it, not because they supported Russian oil flowing to Hungary, but because it was the price of removing Orbán's last excuse to block the loan. Orbán, a lame duck with weeks left in office and no political capital to spend, folded. "Once oil deliveries are restored, we will no longer stand in the way," he posted on X. Zelensky responded immediately, "There can be no grounds for blocking it anymore." 2 days later, EU ambassadors approved the full package. No objections, no drama. Just the quiet sound of 90 billion euros finally being unlocked. The loan wasn't the only thing Orban had been blocking. The EU's 20th package of sanctions against Russia, originally supposed to be adopted on February 24th, the anniversary of the invasion, was also stuck behind the Hungarian wall. It went through today, and it's massive. The package targets 120 individuals and entities, the largest round of listings in 2 years. It sanctions 36 companies across Russia's oil supply chain and 46 ships in Russia's shadow fleet, bringing the total number of blacklisted tankers to 632. These are the underinsured, obscure-flagged vessels Russia uses to export crude above G7 price caps. The sanctions lay the groundwork for a future full maritime services ban on Russian oil, though Greece and Malta pushed back, worried about economic damage to their shipping industries. Transaction bans hit 20 additional Russian banks, and for the first time, 4 financial institutions in third countries, in Kyrgyzstan, Laos, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, that were caught helping Russia circumvent sanctions. There's a ban on cybersecurity services to Russia, mandatory due diligence for tanker sales, restrictions on 58 companies involved in manufacturing military goods, including drones, and 16 entities in China, UAE, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Belarus got designated for providing dual-use goods to Russia's military-industrial complex. Perhaps the most consequential long-term measure, EU companies can now sue in European courts to recover damages for assets that Russia seized under its counter-sanctions laws. That's a legal weapon that could make any company think twice about investing in Russia ever again. Let's be direct about what this changes on the ground. Ukraine was fighting a war while running out of money to fight it. This loan doesn't win the war, but it prevents Ukraine from losing it for financial reasons. It guarantees that soldiers get paid, that ammunition gets purchased, that air defense systems stay operational through 2027. The 60 billion euro military strand, with its Made in Europe provisions, will accelerate European defense production at a time when the continent's arms industry is still struggling to scale. France can only produce 3,000 artillery shells per month. The EU collectively produced 1.4 million 155mm shells in 2025, still not enough for Ukraine's consumption rate. This money, flowing directly to European manufacturers, could help change that equation. The political signal matters too. Russia's strategy has always included a bet that Western support would fracture, that one election, one veto, one crisis would be enough to break the coalition. Orban was Putin's best asset inside the EU. With Magyar replacing him, Moscow loses its most reliable blocker. The EU just demonstrated that even when one member state tries to sabotage the alliance from within, the system eventually corrects. That's not nothing. That might be worth more than the 90 billion euros itself. So here's where we stand. The EU just approved the largest financial aid package in its history for a single country at war. Hungary's 16-year era of obstruction is ending. Russia just got hit with the most comprehensive sanctions package yet, and Ukraine, which was weeks away from financial collapse, just got a lifeline that extends through 2027. But 90 billion euros still isn't enough. The IMF says Ukraine needs 130 billion euros for the next 2 years. That leaves a 40 billion euro gap that somebody needs to fill. The United States, which has historically been Ukraine's largest individual donor, is now distracted by the Iran war and domestic political turmoil. European countries are squeezing their social programs to fund defense, and Russia shows no sign of stopping. So here's my question for you. Is Europe finally stepping up, or is this just the bare minimum dressed up as a historic moment? Can a continent that couldn't produce enough artillery shells 3 years ago actually build the defense industrial base to sustain Ukraine long-term? And with Orban gone and Magyar coming in, is this the beginning of a truly united European front against Russia? Or will the next election in some other country produce the next veto? Let me know in the comments. This story is developing literally as we speak. The sanctions went through today, the loan was finalized today. So hit subscribe if you want to stay on top of this in real time. I'll see you in the next one.